Good evening and welcome to the 28th episode of Season 1 of the Shiv Nadar Foundation Conversations. The Shiv Nadar Foundation Conversations is an initiative to inject positivity into our lives, create ripples of inspiration in these times. It's also to speak to leaders from around the world, as well as here at home, about their journeys and have some fun while talking to them. In the series, we've hosted Nobel laureates like Kailash Satyarthi, badminton champions PV Sindhu, people from the world of entrepreneurship like Dipinder Goyal, people from the world of sport like the Manchester United manager Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, and lots of people from different walks of life, from fashion, from the wildlife world as well. We've hosted more than 27 guests so far, and these sessions have been seen more than 20 million times on social media. We hope that these conversations inspire you and continue to lift your spirits. Today, we have with us Ronnie Screwvala. Ronnie needs little introduction. He's one of India's most successful entrepreneurs. He's the co-founder and chairman of UpGrad. He's also was the founder of UTV, and he's now also a philanthropist through his foundation, Swades. Ronnie, a big welcome to the Shiv Nadar Foundation Conversations.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. I think it's going to be an interesting hour and look forward to it.
Thank you. So we've been running this platform for the last 5 months, and we're thrilled to have you here because I don't think we've had someone with such a varied background across so many different
background. Okay, I'll try and live up to that expectation.
I'm sure, I have no doubt you will. Right. So Ronnie, while your success stories are pretty well known, let's start with the early years in Bombay. Growing up, what kind of family life did you have? What was education like? What was it like growing up?
I think very, very, very fond memories. I come from a lower middle class background. I think first 18 years I spent at Grant Road, which is right now a very congested area of Mumbai. But it kind of gave you a leveling and a very, very basic outlook of life, and I think that was very good. I still have the strongest memories from there, and I still see myself rooted in those days. I think my early education was in a school called Duns Institute, and everyone used to teach me because you wear this Duns cap. And then I moved to Cathedral School in Mumbai for the last 4 or 5 years, and then did my college in Sydenham with commerce, which no surprises. I mean, almost every third person wants to do BCom. I think it's the easy way out. It's not the tough one. It's a sort of easy way to go. I think I came in from school with a lot of arrogance because you come from a reasonably successful school. I'd done pretty well in my marks in my Cambridge exam at that particular point in time. There was no 10+2 at that time. It was 11 standard. So you can almost jump a year and get into college. And then I flunked in my second year at college, and I think that was the time I felt, okay, that's the end of everything else. The parental pressure that most people feel in India about this concept of performing during school and in college life is always so acute. I dare say, being a Parsi, it wasn't that kind of acute. I have to give my parents due credit. But at that time, it sounded like the end of my world,
Right.
That would be permanently on my CV and all aspects of that. But life moves on. And I think when I finished my BCom, I had a crossroad of whether I wanted to continue more studies or be an entrepreneur. And I think at that stage, compared to even now, it's definitely a tough decision to make. I come from a family where everyone else was professionals. Everyone was much more learned and focused on academics more than I was. And here I wanted to start off my own. But worse still, I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do when I started up. So it wasn't an immediate thing that I wanted to start up on my own. I just felt two things. I felt I didn't want to work for somebody else at a very early stage. And later on, in retrospect, I can say that part of the core there was also that I felt I was not good at implementing somebody else's vision. And I just felt internally that I wanted to implement my own. So I think that's the early days of my crossroad. And I kind of bit that bullet without a plan B. I think, my parents, then after accepting that I wanted to be an entrepreneur, kind of compromised and said, why don't you do one thing? Why don't you study so that at least you have an insurance policy that if things go wrong as an entrepreneur, you can always go back to a job. And that was my bigger crossroad to go through with my parents, to tell them, and actually, I don't want a plan B, because if I have a plan B, like if I have done my MBA or if I've done my chartered accountancy and CA, which my dad was very keen I did, then the probability that I may not last it out as an entrepreneur is high. And that the first time I see real failure, which I saw at least 20 times in my first 5 years, I just jump and take a job. But if I didn't have that reservoir, I'd actually stick it out. Now, from a parental point of view, that's an even more difficult thing to accept, because it was a good compromise. Study a little bit more and then go out and do something on your own. But I chose the tougher way out.
Right. So at least you had the clarity of thought in your mind that that's what you want to do. You want to be an entrepreneur. You want to work for yourself. How did you get started, though? I mean, even though you didn't know what you wanted to do, how did you get your first entrepreneurial break? Was it planned or serendipitous? And if I'm not mistaken,
I think I'm a strong believer in serendipity. I think and that chases me all the way to everything that I've done, my second innings that we might talk about a little later on. So I think it was definitely serendipitous. I think whether it was whatever business that I was looking at and doing, opportunities came about. And, when you're at your early stage, you're naive. You look at opportunities in a very different way. So you look at those opportunities there. I think my extracurricular activities, both in school, in college, and a little bit after that, to earn my pocket money, was really elocution, dramatics, debating, and drama. And that kind of sort of led me to what I call, at that time, I couldn't even say media and entertainment like we say it so confidently now, because at that time there was no nomenclature for it. But I think my extracurricular activities kind of led me to what I thought I would want to do in my entrepreneurial journey. And that's pretty much how it started.
Okay. And how did UTV come about, right? You mentioned that in the first few years you had many failures. Was UTV part of that in the first few years, or did it come about later?
So UTV came about a little bit later in the entire thought process. I think my first tryst was with cable TV, with my then ex-father-in-law, where we decided to start cable TV. And I think there were eventual successes, but after a lot of failures. Now, one would think that if you wanted to start a second channel where all you could see was a single channel, which was at that time Doordarshan, and televisions weren't made with a remote control, one would think, wow, that's a slam dunk, right? I mean, everyone will come and lap it up. But we didn't get a single customer for the entire first year.
Really?
Okay? And that's with, so I think the failures would be many, from accepting the fact that after 6 months, everyone said, really, do you want to hold on to this business? Maybe you want to try something else, to the number of times the doors were banged on your face because people said, who are you? Why do you want to come to my house? And I'm saying, I'm come to some cable TV. And they say, come back at 9 p.m. And when you go back at 9 p.m. and they say, why have you come so late? So it was a fair amount of that. But I think at the end of 1 year, you tasted a little bit of success. So I think my learnings have always been more from my failures than my success.
So you were given the runaround like all entrepreneurs.
Oh, yeah. And I think I realized that I was trying to sell cable TV, but the knack was to figure out how to be an interior designer first, because they were more interested to see how the cable would come into the house in a concealed manner and where would it go, more than what would the program be. So 75% of our conversation was more about how the cable would come in through the building or through the door, then what have you got to offer? So, if you hadn't gone there and you hadn't banged the doors and you hadn't been banged the door back on you, you wouldn't have got that insight.
Aesthetics matter a great deal, no matter what, right?
Yeah. And I think that's been my ingrained thought process from very early days. And I think it came about at that particular point of view, again, that, yes, I'm not saying there should be no plan B. Of course, when you're making plans, there should always be a plan B. But I think fundamentally, crunch time in life, if you really want to be pushed, you should have less of plan Bs, because then you focus on your plan As in a very different manner. If I had the luxury to not accept that cable TV was maybe before its time and that I was wasting my time, and if I had a degree and I felt, okay, now maybe I should go take a job, probability in that 1 year with the slaps and the pushbacks that we had, I might have done that.
And, the growth of UTV through that time, right? It's
so
phenomenal.
This was actually a different business that we then sold, because at the end of 5 years, we scaled it to a particular level. And then I think regulatory wise, there wasn't that much of clarity. There were lots of issues on copyrights and regulatory. And then pretty much when the mushrooming of the industry came about, we felt this was not something with the grayness of the regularity we could do much more. So I actually had our COO of the organization who popped into my room and said, I want to quit. And I said, where are you going? He says, I'm joining somebody in the South to start a cable TV network. So I said, why don't you buy ours? And that's exactly how serendipitously it happened. Did I have a plan that I was going to exit the business? No, but that's how it kind of took place. And then later on, UTV happened over a certain period of time, about 3 or 4 years later. And again, that was a focus more because I was doing extracurricular activities and as a hobby, television and front of camera hosting. Therefore, one decided we'll start with creating ad commercials, corporate documentaries, airline in-flight programming, dubbing for almost every multinational that wanted to come into the country. It was a very basic B2B service. Later on, it kind of got defined as a media and entertainment company.
Mm-hmm. And the success of it obviously grew so well. It was a great, phenomenal success story. Was selling out to Disney always the plan, or was that?
Oh no, I think I stuck it out longer than most people. So it's easy. If firstly, I think exits are never planned, because then what does that mean? That you're actually creating something not in your vision, but what you think is 4 years later somebody else's vision would like to buy into that company.
Right.
And that's a disaster, complete and absolute disaster. So I think anyone who says you planned, and anyway, this was like the exit to Disney happened, I'd say almost 18 years later, right? So who plans to have an exit 18 years later to whoever you wanted to be? At that stage, we were a B2B company. 7 years later, we morphed to a B2C company. At that stage, there was no context of anyone getting a loan, any kind of financing, any kind of private equity, no angel investment. Our first investor was Warburg Pincus. This was their first investment into India, their very first media investment into Asia. Then News Corp and Murdoch came in. That had its life of its own. Then we morphed to a B2C company. In between, I would say the number of setbacks, I think we were bankrupt at least 4 times during that period of time. And I mean technically bankrupt, because that's the time when, again, plan A versus plan B comes into play. And I think with every business that we started, and our morphing from a B2B to B2C was some of the more challenging times for us.
So the quintessential entrepreneurial story: you did the pivot, went bankrupt, and you still stuck it out, and did well.
And again, I think the final exit was serendipitous. Because we had a great partnership with Disney for 5 to 6 years. They were on our board. They had 3 members out of a 12-member board. They owned 32% and were looking at going up. I kind of owned by that time, as a public listed company, about 25% of the company. And I knew that for the next growth of the company, I would need to raise the next $300, $400 million of capital, in which case I would be diluted. And that was the crossroad for me, where I felt, now who will I be working with? And who will I be working for if I get diluted more than this element? Along with the fact that, Disney was superb and strategic on our board, but they also had the Walt Disney Company India. So they kind of popped the question and said, why don't we put it all together? It took 30 days to decide. And I think that's because I'm very passionate about the company that I built, but I wasn't emotional about it.
Okay, that's fair. And what did you venture into films while you were at UTV, or did that come later?
Oh no, it was all part of everything in media and entertainment. Whatever I did was in films there. I'd say the first 5 films we did were an absolute disaster, total failures. My chief financial officer walked in the room and said, we've got to stop. We've got to get a partner. You don't know what the hell you're doing. We got to stop. And again, I think it was that perseverance that says, if we want to be a B2C company and we want to unlock value and we want to create value, we needed to be big screen, small screen, medium screen, and all screens. And we stuck it out. And then the fortunes turned.
And you've produced some stellar movies since. There've been some real winners all across the board, real variety.
We've been very, very proud of. I think for me, Rang De Basanti was our turning point of really changing the narrative for cinema making in India. Swades was one of our early movies, which I still call it before its time, because it was not as commercially successful as it like to be. Then we made a movie called Laksh, which I think got an entire youth generation to want to go and join the armed forces.
Brilliant movie, yeah.
Yeah, and then there were lots of offbeat movies like A Wednesday, which kind of had an indelible ink, and I worked very well with another director where we created Barfi, Jodha Akbar. Yeah, it's been a fun ride, along with the fun channels, the gaming company, everything that we did together.
So the film industry especially has incredibly evolved and transformed, especially over the last decade. And now with so many platforms, Netflix. Especially with the lockdown, while cinemas shut down and went empty, but all these platforms, Netflix, Prime, I mean, they've been booming, right? So the running joke is that people saw so much of it, they thought they'll finish Netflix, and when do you think normalcy sort of will resume? What's the short-term outlook for the film industry? And what's a long-term outlook as well?
I think for all of us to predict a normalcy is going to be almost impossible, because it's really it's something that has to happen in a different way. And therefore, to define what that new normalcy will be dependent on how long this abnormalcy is, if I can put it that way. If it's 6 months, it's a trend. If it's 1 year, it starts becoming a habit. If it's 2 years, it's a change of everything because then it's a whole new recalibration of almost everything that you do, not just in the media and entertainment sector, but in almost every sector. So I think that is something that is going to be difficult to predict. But today I would say that, the theatrical window is an important one. But I think what has happened with the digital platforms is that it's given you the multiplicity of your choice. What I think is going to happen in this 1 year is a lot of people are going to accept that actually what I thought was okay for me to watch only on a big screen, I'm now enjoying it on a small screen. And I think the OTT platforms have done a good job of making it a convenience and a habit that comes on a Friday. But I think coexistence will happen overall as we go forward. At the core, storytelling won't change. But storytelling that will go to big screen or to the OTT platforms, that deliberation will change forever, I think.
Right. So I think, film production is just about resumed, right? And, there was a hiatus for many months where movies were not getting made. What's that going to do for
the movie? I have to say I'm not that deeply involved because of my edtech and my not-for-profit. I'm not that. I mean, UTV, I left in 2012. I had a 5-year non-compete. So in 2017 to 2018, I felt the bug of storytelling hadn't left me, which is when I started RSVP, but more as a passion project than the business that was UTV. And the reason I'm differentiating between a passion project and a hobby versus a business is when you're running a business, 50% of the time or more, you have to do something, and 50% you want to do something. But when it's a passion project, you only do what you want to do. And I think that's the luxury I'm blessed with. And therefore, I can tell the stories I want to tell in a very different manner without the agenda that I need to do a certain level. So I think that's where it's left. But yeah, if I were to look at the industry today, it's going to be a tough one to know for normalcy, right? Because the fundamentals of a shoot means a lot of people in a small place, in a lot of buzz of activity with a continuous interaction. So that's fraught with danger as we go forward. So resumption, like any other country, is realizing that resumption could be temporary, because then you can go off again, on again. So I think it'll go through its own roller coaster right now.
Yeah, I think if cricket and cinemas are up and running, we're back to some degree of normalcy for sure.
Yeah. The only difference is with cricket, you can do it without spectators because it's now become a television sport. With cinemas, you need everyone out there.
That's right. The feel of the cinema needs to be there. So
and hopefully the same with kabaddi, because I think that to us that's a team that I own, and we're doing it. It's done phenomenally well. But at the same time, it's been fun. It's a contact sport, but again, it's something that can happen without the spectators, and it can still be very exciting.
So that brings me actually to to my next theme of questions, is that you were in the media space, you were in the film space, and you took this complete transition basically to the edtech space, and as well as sports to some extent of it. But how did UpGrad come about, and how did you sort of transform your thinking from media and entertainment all the way into education?
So I think when one decided to divest to the Walt Disney Company in 2012, the decision to divest had nothing to connect it to what I wanted to do in the future. So at that time, did I know very clearly what I wanted to do all over again? Not at all. I think the first crossroad for me was our not-for-profit. We had a small foundation that we started a long time back at a very young age. And I would therefore urge a lot of people that are looking at the word philanthropy as a very heavy word. For us, I think today, even for the younger generation, giving back to society is something that was very well ingrained in the culture of what we want to do at a very early stage. So I think the first crossroad was, what did we want to do with our not-for-profit? And my wife, Zarina, and I spent a lot of time researching that with a lot of people because we wanted to scale it up. The crossroad we reached there was that we wanted to have a very scaled up operation with our Swades Foundation in rural India. The reason I'm giving you this background is because of that, I was quite clear that while my wife is going to give 100% of her time, I was going to give 30% of my time at least to the not-for-profit. which means the first criteria for me was I could not start and be a CEO of a company of my own, even if I was to start it, because I would not do the full justice to it, especially if I was committing 30% to a not-for-profit. So my first context was I'd looked at a few private equity investments, but I think in less than a year, I realized that that was not my DNA. I loved it. I love the entrepreneurs. I'm still very proud of the investments I've made, and I still nurture them, and I'm very happy to be with them. But I'm a doer. I'm not necessarily an investor and a mentor at its core, and I therefore wanted to go back to create something. So I looked at one or two sectors, but narrowed down to education. Then I spent another year. In the same year I was researching not-for-profit is when I was researching the education sector, met about 300, 400 people to understand that. And I looked at my list of things that I thought I brought to the table. One, my ability to be obsessive about scale. Two, my approach to look at things in a very non-linear manner, which I think is my strength. It allows me to be disruptive. It allows me to never go back and say, oh, this is how it got done. So precedent is out, risk-taking is in. And if you take precedent out and you put risk as a high factor in, the returns at some stage with a lot of failures in between will be disproportionately high.
Right.
So I thought education was ripe for disruption, and that's something I could do in the process. And it just so happened that in the conversation that I was having with the many, many, many people, I found my co-founders. I approached them. They were excited about it. They were turning entrepreneurship. I was going back to start something on my own. And that's pretty much how UpGrad happened. And it's been about 4.5 years since then. And it's been a great journey.
Okay. So, especially since the lockdown, right? UpGrad has really been in the limelight, and a lot of people are talking about it. What has the lockdown done for UpGrad? Can you talk a bit about the model, and have you found that people have turned more towards sort of reskilling at this time?
So I think overall, just UpGrad is in the higher education space. So it's everything but the K-12 space, which in fact has got a lot more attention right now because of the fundraising, not just in India, but around the world. But UpGrad is in the higher education. So basically, we want to look at people from the age of 17, 18, all the way up to 48, if not 58, and make a lifelong learning process, which means that they need to be our consumer, our learner, our customer, our partner for the next 30 to 40 years, 30 years at least of their career. So essentially, we believe that every 3 to 4 years, they will come back. Our core hypothesis is that especially in countries like India, or even in Middle East or Southeast Asia or Africa, and sometimes in the Western world, a lot of people get into their jobs a little early and therefore don't have the time to be able to upskill themselves then. Now, to take a year off to do anything is almost impossible, but you can do that online. Right. And we'll come to the credibility of online, which I think we've built. So with that key hypothesis is where we've looked at scaling the business in the higher education space, in the lifelong learning space, colleges, universities, but mostly for working professionals on a lifelong learning basis. Specifically, as far as COVID is concerned, I would say it's not been a magical moment. What has happened is that the evangelism towards online learning and the attention for it is phenomenal. Colleges and universities that were extremely skeptical of it have now accepted it. Sure. Corporates who thought online poo-poo have now realized that, okay, if I can hire people who've done an online degree, diploma, certification, whatever else. Yeah. And the family members that surround the potential consumer, the learner, have also thought that online is kosher versus what are you doing at 11 p.m. in the night in front of a computer for 3 hours and you think you're learning and you're educating? What kind of education is that? Right. So a fair amount of legitimacy, credibility, and urgency is what has happened to the edtech space in these last 5 months. And therefore, it's not a magical moment, but I think what we would do in 4 or 5 years, we can now do in 18 months to 24 months.
Yeah, so it's, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's we run a lot of educational institutions as well. And suddenly, you were doing online, we were doing brick and mortar, but everyone is doing online now. And so, what's interesting is when, you have a lot of university content on your platform that you're selling. And now that universities are online themselves, right? Down the line, do you see them as collaborators or even competitors? Because suddenly everyone they've had an awakening that there's an opportunity here to be won.
So I want to clarify a couple of things. Firstly, UpGrad does not take university content put on our platforms. Every
Okay.
single hour of learning is created and produced by us.
Right.
Second, the temporary definition of online for a lot of people today is put a Zoom camera and record the live lecture or do a live lecture. That is not online education. If that is the future of online education, it'll flop, fail, and be miserable.
Right.
The entire element of online is to actually deeply invest in the learning experience. So what we have is asynchronous classes and synchronous classes, number one. Two, a technical platform where peer-to-peer learning is the most important part. So a class where, we've uncalendared at the academic year. So almost every course that we starts every month. So there are 12 start dates for any course versus this normal period where you feel July, August, and September are the ones. But most important is, for example, when we have a class with 200 learners or a class with 1,600 learners in one on a day when we start. The 1,600 people class is much more active, much more lively, because the peer-to-peer learning, because of our technology platform, is huge. So essentially, it completely is on par with offline learning, because at the end of 2 weeks, you get grading. We can go back to the student and says, day before yesterday, when you took that last video session for 10 minutes, you rewound that entire learning 3 times. Did you have problem comprehending that? 2, they have tests at the end of every class week. They would have some sense of grading. So you're getting much more live feedback than you would get in your offline environment. So that entire combination, and the most important one is mentors and student counselors. So we have about, for every 100 to 200 of our learners, we have one counselor. That counselor actually calls them and says, hey, you didn't log on at all last week. This is a great session going on. We've actually gone into call spouses, kids, and parents also, and saying, hey, your son or your wife or your husband hasn't logged on.
Right.
Therefore, you can get to completion rates of 85%. So this is really the online learning and edtech companies of tomorrow, not the ones that today transiently are putting cameras in front and running classes and live lectures.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you need to replicate the experience to the best extent possible. And, Ronnie, for you at a personal level, correct me if I'm wrong, but, education is a real slow burn, right? Unlike entertainment and media, movies, and sports for that matter. I mean, in a movie, you know the success story in a matter of a weekend. In sports, you know it in a matter of hours. So for you, how has that transition been? Especially since it's a slow burn, it's a more of a patient. You got to have a lot more patience in that game, and it takes time to really build a lot of credibility around the educational space.
As an overall brand and as an overall company, yes. But I can say that when we started even media, to build a brand for even a movie studio takes its time, right? I mean, and it takes some time to say, the reason we're having a conversation on movies is because there was a certain style of storytelling and a certain sense of directors and an eclectic mix of movies that one did to build that brand. That says that if it was a UTV movie, or now more recently is an RSVP movie, there'll be a certain sense of storytelling that'll be there, which will be different from the normal. So I think for building a brand for UpGrad, yes, it would take its normal stretching time, but that's how it has been in the past for me. But actually, when we started our very first course in UpGrad, it was an entrepreneurship, okay? And we launched within 6 months of us having incorporated the company. And we had, I think, about our first 200 people who joined an online course. But in the first 2 weeks, whether data and data analytics or an entrepreneurship course or a digital marketing course or a machine learning or an artificial intelligence course or an MBA in business analytics is going to work or not going to work. Also, the feedback that you get is quite live. To give you an example, when you graduate out of college, the things you most at your thank you speech would thank your 1 or 2 memorable professors. In an online course, our counselors get the most thanks because they're the ones who've done the most amount of interaction. So our feedback is very, very live, very, very immediate. We are investing in careers of tomorrow, and therefore it is very important for us to have what I would call the pulse. So I think from my first innings to my second innings, what I brought to the table was my obsession for scale, understanding how to build a brand. But most important was a deep insight and understanding of the consumer. Because I think, especially in media and entertainment, if you can't preempt trends, then you're going to fail a lot more often than if you succeed.
Okay. What's great about the stories that you're sharing is that, and I'm going to pay you a compliment, is that I think that your appeal is sort of generational agnostic, right? So my father's generation, my generation, even students, they look up to you as an entrepreneur. I think they find your stories very relatable, very sort of real.
Well, that's because I've gone back again to the basics, right, and started up all over again. So that's how I need to feel in the first place. But yes.
Yeah. Education keeps you young, right? So, some general questions around entrepreneurship. We've already got some questions coming in from, I would imagine, a lot of students and young people at the foundation. Is this a good time to start a venture, right? Has the COVID impact, the lockdown, is that, in your views, is that an opportunity, or is it, time to be cautious and be patient?
Yeah, so this is not, there can never be something prescriptive because it's too general a question. But my personal sense is the simple answer, if I had to give a yes or no answer, I'm saying yes. But that's because it really depends on you, your self-conviction, and your clarity. This is also not the time. This is the time when herd mentality will be at its least. And actually starting a business when there's low herd mentality is actually a very opportune time. Because the herd mentality normally is awful because the best you can see is the backside of the person in front of you. That's what's herd mentality, right? How much of a vision can you have? So for many aspects, when you're starting at a base camp today, you'll be a lot more hungrier. You'll be a lot more careful. The whole charm of overspending, raising money, all that will level you a lot more. And I think that many people are not rushing into that. So that'll give you. So if you have your own self-conviction, this is as good a time. Is this a better time than a normal time? No. Is this a good time? No. But I can say this is no better a time than any other time if you wanted to start something you were very clear about.
Mm-hmm. And the whole game, right? Especially around fundraising and valuations and sort of the narrative that exists now in the entrepreneurial world. I'm talking about the really younger sort of entrepreneurs. Yes. Does that still hold up? After COVID, I mean, it's still about selling out.
I'm glad you use the word game. Firstly, I'm glad you use the word game because that is a game. And I, as a first generation entrepreneur, and you get beaten up a lot. You get beaten up a real lot. So I can say that the bruises may not show, but you get beaten up a lot. And I think today there's a higher sense of entitlement that there needs to be. This entitlement today is if I haven't raised money, then how can I start a business? Which is a bad sense of entitlement. Or I got a great idea and how come nobody's funding me? Again, a bad sense of entitlement. So I think if you've got a fundamental business and if you're not getting funded, it's your job to start up in any case, because actually your first funding may be your easiest. Your second and your third funding and your fourth funding are the ones that actually become even tougher, because by that time you've got either 30 people, 300 people in your organization, and you need to have many more worries, and your outcomes are binary. So if you haven't crossed the bridge on your first one, the probability of crossing bridges later on is going to be much tougher.
Okay. And, especially around entrepreneurship, and I know that, India has come a long way, especially over the last decade and 2 decades, but, failure is still a stigma, right?
Yeah,
and
unfortunately, yes.
Yeah. And you spoke about it 20 minutes ago, especially around, the multiple times that you failed and, how you had to explain it to your family, right? What can be done to sort of destigmatize failure? And, are there any suggestions over there, for especially the young lot that are looking to venture out on their own?
So, Shikhar, right now, I do about 3 focus groups a week with about between 10 to 30 people at various stages, college people, working professionals at various ages. And the reason I'm doing that is I've just chosen to write 2 books. The reason I'm saying 2 books instead of 1, but they're on soft skills. Because I think today, there's an entire degree approach and then there's a soft skills approach. But our soft skills approach are most ignored in India. And so for me, the feedback that I get from people there is one where I think a lot of people are extremely challenged and they need to have that self-confidence in themselves to go forward. That's really pretty much the core of it. I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but
yeah, absolutely. I think it's circumstantial. It depends on the individual.
Yes.
And I had a follow-up question to that, because when you talk to a lot of it's common parlance to say that ideas, you have to have a great idea nowadays, right? And what we at least try to teach is that the skill sets that you need for execution, focus and perseverance, they seemed a bit sort of old century like, right? I wouldn't say it's vanished, but the emphasis, it seems that the needle shifted so much more towards the idea. What is your view on that?
So in this in UpGrad, when we started our entrepreneurship course, the first lesson we had for the first 1 month was idea validation. And then when we went to Startup India and the PMO asked us to put that onto a free platform, and they said, shrink it to 1 month. And I said, I can't shrink this entire course. They said, what is the one thing you would do in your 1 month if you did the course? And I said, idea validation, because that allows you to take a very 360-degree approach to your validation of an idea. Because just because you have an idea, it's guaranteed that at least 40 other people somewhere in the world have had that same idea. Now it's a question of validation. So the validation for most people is, oh, but if I don't have the money and I can't do the product, and I'm saying, no, try hiring the first 4 people. If you can hire 4 people who feel actually that they have a buy-in on your idea, that's a validation. So there are lots of other ways in which you can do the validation. So I think today there is absolutely no marks for an idea, good or bad, because good or bad is going to be determined not because your idea was good, but how it panned out, how you executed on it, what was your commitment to be able to do that, how nimble were you for change, and all those aspects that go with it. So an idea is a nice thing to have, but it's over-glamorized.
Okay. Yeah, completely agree with that. And you did mention about your foundation, Swades, a little earlier on, and you said that you started at a very young age, right? So the typical mindset is you do well and you create wealth for yourself, and then you get into giving back to society. So what triggered you
That's
to
gone.
do?
I think that's why philanthropy is a 20th century word, and we can't call it philanthropy anymore.
Right.
And this morning I was talking to somebody and they kind of defined it as participative philanthropy. And I said,
Okay.
I like the participative word because that means sweat equity. So I would say today's parlance, entrepreneurs understand sweat equity. Okay?
Right.
And I think social and rural is up for sweat equity, because today at the younger level, you don't need to have a bank balance and you don't need to have evolved and found free time only when you're retired to be able to give back. But I think the younger generation are very cognizant of that. They're aware of that. They're having a much more balanced outlook. I mean, I have a live example in my family because my daughter went out there. She finished her school in the US and finished her college in the US and a post-graduation in film, came back, did one film, and then came back and said, I want to be in the not-for-profit space. So even though my wife and I have a large not-for-profit space, she went out and started her own lighthouse project. And I've met a lot of people at that young age, and I think my biggest learning is interacting with a core group of people. But I think today's younger generation has realized that they don't need to have in order to give back. Because what you give back in terms of your sweat equity, in terms of time, in terms of volunteering, on a consistent basis, not on a casual basis. Because volunteering when we were in school was going out and painting a hospital bed or a wall, and you felt, wow, I did a lot of good charity work in that situation. That's very different right now.
Right. So measure the outcomes of actually the work that you're doing.
Exactly. And I think the younger generation are very clear. For them, an outcome and an ROI of the time I've invested, whether it's to mentor a street child or to do X, Y, or Z, is very high on their minds.
Okay. And, even another question on philanthropy, when you look at it, right, there's so many set of issues in society to solve, right? So how do you go about, and I believe your foundation works at the grassroots level in rural areas. So how do you identify the problem set? And within that, how do you draw the skills that you've learned from entrepreneurship and apply it into your
that's a great question. And I think philanthropy and overall, if you want to give back, the first thing is you need to be comfortable with what you really want to do. Now, you can always say there's a need, but you need to feel that that's what I want to do. So we chose that we wanted to work in rural India versus urban. We chose that we wanted to be an execution foundation where we want to roll up our sleeves and not just cut checks or go out to vendors, but actually be on the ground ourselves. We chose a geography which was no more than 3 to 4 hours of driving distance from us because we wanted to visit our geography and our people for a period of time. So I would say that's the one aspect of what you should select to what you want to do. And then you determine your own scale of how you want to do it. We just decided in the first years, it was very small, because we didn't have any money in any case. My entire asset base, almost till my exit with Disney, was more on debt than equity. And like everyone else thinking that. I think my first liquid event ever, and I remember my dad keep telling me, you can't keep investing in just your own company. What about investing in Larsen & Toubro? What about investing in Cipla? And I said, well, why would I do that? I've got UTV. He said, but you can't do that. You've got to diversify risk. I said, no, I know exactly the kind of returns I can get here. I want to put all my money in here. So that's your mentality at that kind of approach. So I think you need to be clear about what you want to do and how you want to give back.
Right.
On the context of how your corporate experience or your entrepreneurial experience, I have to tell you that my entrepreneurial experience told me that I wanted to run an execution foundation. I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to create an organization structure. I wanted to have my own staffing do it. And that was the downside was I decided I wanted to run it. And therefore, then you go about running it like an organization and set targets. And I think in the first 2 years, we learned some really horrible lessons. I wouldn't say horrible, but strong lessons of the community may not be ready to go with your targets. And then it becomes a push versus the pull. And so in rural, and when you're doing philanthropy, targets are important, but they don't matter so much because I can thump on the table and say, listen, we had planned to do 500 toilets this month, but we did only 393. And how come? But the fact of the matter is, if I don't have a buy-in on the community, they don't contribute their 10 or 15% or do their shramdan to do it, the probability of them using the toilet later on can backfire on you more. And what you'll have is a storage space and not a toilet. And therefore, it won't be an open defecation village free, which is what was our own objective. So I think that was the big learning for us, that building trust and seeing that they have a buy-in, especially, so they're your consumer. So it's like you're going out there and trying to say, I'm going to produce my entire factory and put it out there on the shelves and people will buy it. No, the consumer will decide they're going to buy it. So I think that was a learning for us in our first 3 years of Swades at the scaled model, which I think we've now changed, and everything is led through our village development committees.
You know, we actually got a very similar project in HCL as well. It's called Samudai. I mean, from the description, it sounds very, very similar. So maybe offline we'll exchange some ideas.
We should talk about that for sure. Yeah.
So Ronnie, I've got some audience questions.
So
Anil asks, is digital education widening the gap between the haves and the have-nots and creating a new type of sort of stratification in society?
So I would say no, I mean, for two reasons. One, if I wanted to do a course today online, it will be 1/10 of the cost of doing it offline. And the reason I'm saying that is because you might think that there's a cost to the online. And yes, education is not for the discounted. It's a serious commitment that you need to make. But the cost of you not being in a job for 1 year and the opportunity lost for a year, and you may not have a job again, plus rerouting yourself out of a place and going to another place where the campus would be, is a huge cost. So actually, it's allowing it to be much more affordable. When we're starting our degree courses right now, from BCom to whatever else, there is an entire generation that have actually started work even after 12th standard. They're now finding that, my God, I'll never be able to leave my job and get a degree. And they may want a degree for marriage. They may want a degree for anything that they want to do in their lives. They can now have it at a very affordable price. So actually, if we have to fill 30 million seats in India in the education space, it's only going to come from online, because the offline centers will always be for the 2,000, 3,000, 4,000. That's what I do with one single cohort or a class in our online part. So I think it will bridge it more than it will distance it.
Right. And Shivanshu asks, offline colleges and universities are preferred because they've got industrial credibility and good placement scores, and online colleges, are really online sort of platforms like UpGrad are really in vogue now and really taken it by storm. Down the line in many years to come, how do you see them coexisting with each other?
It is coexisting. So today, all our courses are in partnerships with universities, whether it's IIIT Bangalore or whether it's IIT Madras, which is the #1 university in India, has been acclaimed by the government, or it's Deakin in Australia, or it's Liverpool John Moore in the UK. It's all through partnerships. So I think the coexistence will be there. Online versus offline in blended learning is also a coexistence. But right now, we believe pure online will also coexist. I think that's going to be a way of the future. Actually, to be honest, and I'll give you the best example, that our first partner was IIIT Bangalore in UpGrad. And today, on Sunday, we did a graduation ceremony for 2,800 students that passed out of our UpGrad IIIT courses. And at the end of that 1 hour session that lasted from 11 to 12, I got a mail from Professor Sadagopalan, who's the dean and director of this thing, saying, wow, Ronnie, you've now really achieved your ambition of high quality at scale, because what we've graduated today out of my university, we did what you did in this one graduation, I did over 20 years. We graduated over 20 years on this one course of data science. We graduated 2,800, and one day we've graduated 2,800.
That is a serious number. 2,800, and was the duration?
These are all 11-month courses.
11-month courses. Okay, so it's as much as in brick and mortar.
Exactly, and with that deep learning, the completion rates being high, and all of them, outcomes is most important. And a third of people in online want to change in a job, a third want to get promoted, and therefore want an increment, and a third actually just want to tank up because then they'll know it'll be an asset to them in the future. But I think the mail that he sent me, and I wrote back to him saying I'm going to preserve this mail, because that's mutual respect between the technology in an edtech company and a university. It summed up the symbiotic relationship that should exist between edtech companies and universities.
Okay. Right. There's a good question that actually comes in from Manoj. He talks about universities and UpGrad, likely fishing in the same pool for talent, and that's teaching talent. So do you find that to be a challenge?
So I would say it's not a pool; it's a sea.
Okay.
It's not as big as the Atlantic or the Pacific, but it is definitely the Indian Ocean and the Bay of Bengal put together. It's a sea. It's not a pool. There are 100 million people in the working professional category. In between 2020 and 2030, 1 out of every 5 people in the world as a working professional is an Indian. That's how large the market is. When you create an ARC and a university, most people, some universities can get to 10 and 20,000 when they're doing undergrad. But in postgrad and in higher learning, it's 4,000 and 5,000 admissions. Otherwise, the faculty is a bit disparate. So I think there's enough there for the need, not just in India, but we're going international with many countries in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, and Africa right now. Massive markets to coexist. And it's a sea, it's not a pool.
So I've got some quick rapid fire questions as well.
Oh dear, rapid fire.
Rapid fire, yes, by popular demand.
Okay.
What would you rate has been your best film production so far?
Sentimentally for me, Rang De Basanti, because it was a turning point. It also changed the entire mood of what the nation was. And more recently, in my new avatar, Uri.
Uri, okay, yeah, brilliant movie. What movie production that did not pan out taught you the most lessons?
Tons of them, more than the ones that did pan out. I think my ratio would be that for every 8 failures, there were 2 successes. And this is not just in movies, but it's in everything that I've done. And I know that sounds like a disproportionate ratio, but let me explain that actually, if I didn't fail 8 times, I wouldn't have succeeded big time those 2 times. And I think that's how people should look at the ratio. It's not like I failed 4 times and I succeeded 6 times and therefore I'm up. The beauty is if you can fail 8 times and you can succeed 2 times and then you're up. Because the 8 times, the loss will be the loss of that one. But the success will be 10x or 20x or 30x. Because you took those risks for those 8 failures is when the 2 will be even more triple X's than everything else. And that's been my learning for almost everything that I've done, whether it's in movies, whether it's in media, whether it's in edtech, even in the not-for-profit space or anything else. To answer your question very specifically, I think the very first movie I did is a movie nobody would have ever have heard of called Dil Ke Jharoke Mein, which was such a complete disaster. It was 99% loss on the movie. It obviously taught me my most important lessons. A, that I was going to stick with it, and B, I have to go with my own gut and gumption and not be influenced by 5 other people who told me, super it.
So and I know we're in rapid fire, but I'm tempted to ask you because through the conversation today, you've spoken continuously, and I think the theme that comes out is resilience, right? So is that level of resilience in being an entrepreneur, is that natural? Is that something that comes naturally to someone, or can it be acquired?
No, I think it has to come naturally, and I think it does come naturally, but it's not a reservoir from day one. It's something that you build over a period of time. The resilience comes with failures. And I know we talked about failures, and I'm saying, yes, I agree. We do not evangelize and celebrate failures as much as we do. The parental pressure is that if you fail means there's a full stop in that context versus the comma.
Right.
And I think that for me is most important.
Okay. One thing that's similar in film and education.
Storytelling. I believe that today, if you ask me today, education, the best person, if I'm giving a class and I'm storytelling, if you're having this class, if you're having this session here, and if it's interesting and it catches us, is because we're storytelling. And storytelling doesn't mean fiction always. The best professor you'll remember from your is the person who explained things in such a nice manner that he kept your attention going. So storytelling.
I couldn't agree more, because for all of us, I mean, the people you remember are the people that made us feel something, and rather than the information.
Touch the chord, touch the memory, touch an emotion, touch something.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you want your lasting legacy to be?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough one. But I think for me, my sense of pride would be a good balance of creating a lot of impact and really otherwise finding a lot of happiness in everything that I do. So it's very important that I'm very happy in what I do. I think for all the hard work at the early days, I'm blessed that today I can choose to do a fair amount of things that I want to do. But that doesn't guarantee you happiness. So I think the right mixture of high impact and self-happiness would be something that I would like to feel I've completed. When you're gone, it's like, if my wife or daughter asks me today, do I want to be cremated or I want to go to a Parsi Dungarwadi where the vultures come for you? I'm saying that's your decision, not mine, because I'll be gone at that time. So there are a couple of decisions I want to be till that time. After that is your decision.
Right. So whatever's in your control while you're there.
Yeah.
Ronnie, it's been absolutely incredible talking to you. Lots of lessons learned, your entrepreneurial zing, your energy levels, I think your sort of never say die attitude. Lots of takeaways for us here at the Shiv Nadar Foundation. It's been truly inspiring and interesting. And I'm sure everyone that's logged in, probably the tens of thousands by now, found their own set of learnings and takeaways from today's conversation. It's been a true honor to host you all at the Shiv Nadar Foundation Conversations today. Just want to remind all the viewers that this conversation will be available on the Shiv Nadar Foundation Facebook page, if you'd like to come back and view it another time. Ronnie, any last words that you'd like to say?
No, Shikhar, thank you. I think you made this very interesting, very interactive, and thanks for taking the time also from your side. Thank you.
Thank you for your time so much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.